Hi, friends. I'm Courtney. I'm a performer, speaker, and a writer. I'm a mama to 3 crazy boys and a super sweet dog. I decided 12 years ago that I needed to create a business that worked for me instead of me working for it. I'm a multi-passionate entrepreneur who may be considered a serial entrepreneur by some, but then I realized that all of my businesses focused on connection, community, and creating an incredible experience. I cannot wait to share with you how to make small but mighty changes in your life to affect your overall well-being and create a life and business you want to get up in the morning for. That's right, my friends. I am the Renaissance Mama. Hi, friends. It's Courtney, the Renaissance Mama, and I want to thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for checking out the show. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for commenting, connecting. Thank you for doing all the things, because without you, then I couldn't do what I do. So I've got to tell you all, I have been on the fence about this episode. When I start planning my episodes each week, I have a mega master list that I create, and sometimes I'm inspired by people asking me questions. Sometimes I'm inspired by something I've read. Sometimes I'm inspired by how I'm feeling. But I know whenever I sit down to actually write an episode, if I'm not feeling it, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not, because it's going to come off as disingenuous. It's going to come off as fake, and it's not me, right? So this week I was really thinking about this topic, and it's been something that's been weighing on my mind, weighing on my heart. And I was unsure though if I wanted to chat with all of you about it. So the topic is all about perception, and really what that means, and the power one person can have when you are in charge of your perspective. So why I was on the fence about this subject is I felt like I'm not an expert. I felt like if I present this subject and I start telling my opinions or telling my stories or sharing my thoughts, I felt like maybe I'm fake. Maybe I'm an imposter. As much as I hate that term, imposter syndrome, I was feeling it this week. There was just something that was making me a little bit nervous about coming on here and chatting about perspective. So I thought, you know what? I'm not going to do it. I put it to the side. I took out my master list and I thought, I'm going to do something else. And that happens sometimes. There's times where I'm literally like writing my show notes for the week, getting ready to film, and I'm like, nope, I don't want to do this anymore. And I put it away, and then I find something else that's really kind of calling to me, or something that I know you guys want to hear about. But this morning, I woke up and I had an email, and it was one of those emails from, I don't even know, a newsletter that I signed up for that I don't even remember signing up for. I know you've been there and done that. We all have. And these are usually emails that if I see them on my phone, I swipe, I delete, I don't even open them. I don't give them a second thought. But today, I, for some reason, opened this email. And this email was from, I don't even remember, I want to say it was Dr. Sarah, and Dr. Sarah was talking about perception and reality and how they are two very different things. So then I felt like it was a sign. I felt like, yes, then this is what I need to chat about today. This is the topic that is on my mind and on my heart, and it's what's inspiring me right now. So I hope it inspires you. So my perspective then changed. I decided I don't care if I'm not an expert. And in fact, if you remember almost a year ago when I started this podcast and show, I never said I was an expert. I, in fact, told all of you I am not an expert, because That's not what I am all about. I am all about connecting with you guys, being honest with you guys, listening to you guys, and sharing my stories and my experiences. Never once have I stood up here and said, I know everything and everybody should listen to me. Never have I said that. Never probably will I say that. So I decided my perspective changed, and I was more than okay to share this topic with you. In fact, I was so inspired to share this topic with you because when you really break it down and you realize the power of perspective, the power any single person can have if they give themselves the ability to look at a situation, to look at a feeling, and understand that there's more than one way to look at it. To understand that at any moment, we always have a choice. We always have a choice to feel this way or react that way, or there are so many opportunities, and perspective is the key. It's the thing that holds that power. So that is why I wanted to chat with you all today about perspective. So I've got to start off. Why has this topic been in my mind recently? Well, like I said, I got the email. That was my inspiration to just go ahead and chat about it. But earlier this week, I was very busy. I had my 2 computers on my desk. I was doing a million tasks at once. I shared with you guys that I have some big projects coming up and things are getting done, and I was feeling awesome, but I still had this little feeling of I don't want to say stress because it wasn't quite stress, but it's a high energy. It's a high excitement that's happening in my world right now because there's so much going on. Good things are going on, but I'm vibrating at a high level. Let's just say it that way. And I was working on all my projects, and all of a sudden I spilled my coffee on my computer. Not a little drop, almost a full coffee all over my computer. And my first reaction was oh my goodness. And I'm grabbing a towel and I'm wiping things down and I'm turning it off and I'm grabbing a super absorbent towel and a paper towel and doing all the things and wiping it down. And it was fine. I took care of it. You never know, right? In those situations, you're oh my goodness, is this going to break my computer? What is happening? So I had that reaction, but then I stopped for a moment and I thought, okay, I could look at this situation, take the perspective of, I just broke my computer. I am so upset. I could start blaming myself. I could start getting angry. I could start getting frustrated. Or I could look at this at a totally different angle. I could look at this from the perspective that I have been actually shopping for a new computer for the last probably 2 weeks. And you guys know me, I am not one to just spend my hard-earned money. Oh, no. I research and I, check things out. I was making phone calls for different people, asking questions. I have probably put the computer in the online cart at least 10 times over the last week or 2 weeks. And I know I needed a new computer. There's all these things happening. I'm actually super pumped and proud that I am buying this computer for my business with my business money. I was so excited to do it, but I was still on the fence because that's me. That's how I work when it comes to money and shopping. I know it's one of those limitations I need to get through, but I was back and forth. So the situation with the coffee on the computer spilling everywhere, I changed my perspective. It was no longer, oh my God, I'm so dumb. Why did I have my coffee there? Why am I doing all these things at once? Why am I so stressed? No, I changed my perspective and I changed the story to, well, now I better go order my computer. And that's exactly what I did. I hopped online. I bought the computer I absolutely wanted. It's on order. It's coming any day now. And I am so happy. So it just really, really made me realize that at any time you have the opportunity to change your perspective. You have the opportunity to look at things in different ways. You can change your attitude, your emotions, your relationships. You have so much power when you stop and you consider the perspective. The first thing I want you to start thinking about when you're thinking about perspective is just really the fact to acknowledge that in any situation, on any given day, whether you're at business, at home with family, dealing with your kids, anything, there is an opportunity to look at every situation in different lights. As a parent and someone who works with a lot of children, I have over the years learned that when situations arise and someone comes running up to me and tells me this is what happened and this is what happened and blah, 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 that I'm only getting one side of that story. I'm only getting a piece of that entire puzzle. So before I make any big reactions or decisions or conclusions, I want to know the whole picture. I want to ask questions to other people. I want to hear all the little tidbits and details from multiple people before I decide and react to a situation. Now just imagine for me for a second that if in any situation you could just stop and acknowledge that there might be another perspective. In relationships alone, it would go miles if we were all able to take a moment and stop and realize that the way we're seeing something right now might not be the only way to see it. Maybe there's more to that story. Maybe there's something in that bigger picture that we're missing. So I told you about that email this morning, talking about perception and reality and how they're very, very different things. And in this email, Dr. Sarah even went to explain the story, and I could see it in my head because it's a situation that we've all been in. I know you have, I know I have it. She explained the story and she painted the picture quite well. It was imagine when you're at a coffee shop and you're in a big hurry and you're waiting and you want to get your coffee, you're looking at the time, maybe you're late, maybe you need to be somewhere, it's really important. And the person in front of you is taking their time and chatting with the barista and. And your first version of that story, your perception is that I'm late. I need to go. This person needs to stop talking. Who do they think they are taking all this time? Now there's even a bigger lineup. Like I need to get my coffee and I need to get out of here. That is the first perception that you could have. That if you stopped for a second and thought about the bigger picture, thought about the other perceptions that could be happening. So in her example, she said, what if that person in front of you that's chatting away at the barista, what if that person is somebody who lives by themselves? Maybe there's someone who's a little bit older and this is the first interaction they've had all day. And they're chatting away and this is probably it could be the best part of their day is getting to chat with that barista. Now the whole perception of what's happening is changing. What if that barista is having an absolute horrible day and having that conversation with that person is changing how they're feeling? Maybe just before this, someone called them and gave them horrible news. Maybe they've been, we're dealing at home looking after a sick family member and having this conversation with somebody is giving them something happy to think about. Maybe this person reminds them of the sick family member. Now, once again, the perception and what's happening in that story has changed. So I'm not asking you to ask any of these people what's happening in their life. You need to know now. You need to figure it out. All I am saying is what if the next time you were in a situation and, you were feeling one way, getting to react one way, getting to take those emotions, and what if instead of saying, this is it, this is how I feel, this is what's happening right now, what if we just all stopped and thought, you know what? There might be another perspective here. That's all I want you to do. I want you to acknowledge that there is another perspective out there, and it's going to change the way you think. The next thing I want you to think about when we're talking about perspective, and this one really has to deal with relationships. So whether you're at home or at work, or you are an entrepreneur, you're dealing with people, clients, I don't know what it is, but you need to get clear on the perspective when you're dealing with communication. We've all been there, right? We think something's happening, someone says something, and we take it in one way and we react because that's how we thought things were going on, when really it's a totally different story of what's happening. I'll give you an example. This week, one of my contract workers, she's worked with me for years. She's absolutely amazing. I love working with her. She was sending me a text message, and she works for somebody else as well, which I know that's part of the deal. I don't have enough work or hours or projects for her to work on. So she does something similar with somebody else, but it's different. We're not in competition. It's not a big deal. Some of the students that she teaches with her other business, we teach with my program. Like, we know this. This is all fine. It's great. She sent me this text message and she asked something about I've got the wording right because the wording was wrong. And that is the point of this story. She sent me a text message, something along the lines of she needed a disclaimer to give to her other boss. And I looked at this text message, and the first thing I reacted was, a disclaimer? He wants me to send him a disclaimer about what? And then I got all upset. I got emotional. I reacted right away. My perspective of what I thought was happening was that he was not impressed with my programming or how I was teaching those students, and he wanted me to give him a disclaimer, share a disclaimer with the parents saying that, he has nothing to do with this project. So I started reacting. I started reacting right away, and I didn't understand what was happening on. And then finally I gave her a call and I said, I don't understand, why would he want a disclaimer? She said, oh, no, that's not what I meant. I meant, do you send a disclaimer to your parents it was actually about something completely different. She wanted to know if I send out a liability form to my parents when they sign up for my programs. Very different perspective, very different situation. And then I got clarity on what was actually happening. So there's so many times when we're working or with family that because communication is not always as clear as it needs to be, our perspective on things might not be what is actually happening. So 100% before you decide your perspective on anything, I would suggest that you ask questions. You get that clarification, especially if your communication is happening through text messages or emails or anything that's not in person. Even sometimes in person, it's worth asking those questions, getting the clarification, really breaking things down. Because what happened in our text message is that she skipped a word. She skipped a word is do you send instead of my boss needs you to send to him. So I was super confused on what they wanted. They used the word disclaimer instead of liability form. So it just was so not what I thought was actually happening. So just try and get very clear in your communications before you decide what is happening, before you decide the perception of what you think is happening. And then once again, instead of me reacting the way I did, I could have taken a step back and said, whoa, there might be another perspective here. There might be something else happening here. And that's exactly what it was. There was a totally different story happening. That's not what she was asking. That's not what this person wanted. So we cleared it all up and figured it out. The next thing I want you to think about when it comes to perspective is to share your perspective. There is so many times, whether we're working with somebody, we're home with our family, we're dealing with our kids, that we kind of expect people to be a mind reader. right? You've been there, you've done it. I know I've done it. And you just expect people to know either what you want, either what you need. You expect them to understand where you're coming from. If you had a big emotion or things are happening and you react in a way, sometimes we just expect people to know things, but they don't. If you don't share your perspective and you don't share where you're coming from, you can't expect people to know what is going on in your mind. They're not mind readers. So I think there's times when it is really good to just slow down and maybe share with people what's happening on your end, what's happening from your perspective. This week, I'm working on that big project. We've got a show going. Whenever show week comes, I am like, oh my God, it's gonna be crazy. I'm raring to go. We were in the middle of rehearsal and I had an issue with this application. The music wasn't working. Then I realized I forgot something at home that I needed for this rehearsal. So I was very frustrated. Things weren't working. I was trying to download things. The anxiety was just building. And then all of a sudden the performers, because they're teens to tweens to, kids some days, depending on their feeling of the day, they were really goofing off and being silly and throwing things and doing that. And I just said, oh, stop. Like I kind of lost it on them. And I took a moment and I changed my perspective. And I just said, hey guys, listen, I need to tell you all, I spent 5+ hours yesterday working on this project. I have been thinking about this project all week long. We put hours into it. I'm working really hard for you. Today I'm having some technical issues, so that's really frustrating. But to be honest, right now, I feel like you guys are not appreciating what I'm doing. So I shared it with them. I shared how I was feeling. I shared my perspective with this group of like 20 teenagers because I wanted them to know this is where I'm coming from. I wanted them to know that I want them to succeed so much that I am doing all of these things to help them succeed. But I also needed them to know that this is how I was feeling. So I need them to meet me halfway. I need them to come in to these rehearsals and these performances caring as much as I do right now. Because if I'm spending hours on my downtime getting ready for this and you guys are kind of goofing around, it makes me not want to do those things. So really stopping and slowing down and having that conversation with this group of people was eye-opening for them. Number one, I think it's really important to chat like that sometimes with children and teens and people that sometimes don't get that same level of conversation. Sometimes people sort of write them off and just, move on to the next thing. But I wanted to give them that learning opportunity. I wanted to give them the chance to be in the open conversation. And I wanted them to know that this is why I'm reacting to this. This is my perspective right now. This is how I feel because of what I see and what is happening. And then the dialogue starts. Then the communication can happen. Then we can decide, oh, actually, I was doing this, I was doing that. Who knows? It can go from there. And it doesn't have to be kids to have these conversations. Sometimes it's really hard to have these same conversations with adults, with friends, with coworkers, with your boss. Sometimes it is important to share with somebody what your perspective is. The best way to do it is to be open, to be honest, and to use the words like I observe or I noticed, not this is how it is. Because that's what we're talking about today. That I don't know if anything is this is how it is. The reality is there's so many ways to look at every single situation. So even when you're chatting with somebody and you're trying to share your perspective, you want to give them that opportunity to share back their perspective. Maybe they see something in a totally different way. Maybe you don't agree. and you don't have to at the end of the day, but you still want to be able to share your perspective and to listen to others when they want to share theirs. Another thing that can really help change your perspective, and what helps when you change your perspective, is it helps change your attitude. And that could be doing anything. I've mentioned before, there's a friend of mine who has 7 children. And she had this post recently, which was so funny because I was thinking about perspective and all of the things that go with it. And on her post, she had said something along the lines of she was doing laundry. And first of all, you can just imagine what laundry for 7 children and herself and her husband looks like, right? Like that's 9 people. I complain about doing laundry with my 3 kids and my husband and myself, and it takes a long time. Now imagine 4 more people, and that's a toddler and kids and messes. Like that laundry must be insane. So she was talking, she put this post of like how, yes, there are days when she's sitting doing this laundry, these mega piles of laundry, that she would love to be doing other things. She would love to be like binge watching some amazing show on Netflix. She would love to be connecting with friends. She would love to be probably doing like anything else than doing the piles and piles of laundry. But she changed her perspective recently because she realized the laundry means she has those 7 kids at home. She has this amazing life that she always wanted. So her perspective changed, and she was able then to change her attitude. And even these little things that we got to do on the daily that sometimes we don't love to do, if we really stop and think about it and change our perspective and change it to something positive and change it to something to realize that we are grateful that we have this opportunity, that the whole thing feels different. Your attitude changes, the way you approach things, the actual task itself of doing laundry feels different because you've changed your perspective, because you were able to stop and see it from that different angle, that yes, it's not what you always want to do, but you can do it. You get to do it. That's the next thing I want to chat a little bit out when you're talking perspective. And I think this is just where it sort of really hits home. I love working out on my Peloton app. It's one of my favorite things to do. I really enjoy it. I mentioned last week that I really work out mainly for my mental health, how it makes me feel, how it makes my body feel. It's just something I'm really into and I enjoy. Without it, I am stressed, I'm cranky, I'm no fun to be around. So I know I need to do that to make me feel good. But one of my favorite things on my Peloton app is one of the instructors, actually a lot of the instructors, but one of my favorite instructors, Jess Sims, always says that you get to do this workout, right? You don't have to do this workout. No. You don't have to do this workout. You get to do that. So sometimes when you are going to do something and you want to change your perspective, all you really need to do is change your vocabulary. Change one word and your perspective is going to change. I know how lucky I am to have the opportunity to work out. I am lucky and grateful that my body allows me to do it. I'm lucky and grateful that I have the time to do it. I am lucky and grateful that I have the opportunity, I have the equipment. Like, there are so many things that I have that I get to work out. I get to do the thing that I actually really enjoy doing, that makes me feel good, that helps my mental health, that makes me be a better person, a better mom, a better entrepreneur, because I feel good. So sometimes a change in perspective is all about vocabulary. We've all been there when you're talking about a situation. Maybe it's something you really want. Maybe it's a new job you really want. Maybe it's a new client you really want to land. And you say, what if I did this? What if we changed that vocabulary? What if we change it to like, when this happens? I say it to my son all of the time. He is on a travel hockey team. And he doesn't have the most confidence when it comes to hockey, which is hilarious because in every other portion of his life, you would actually think he's a pretty cocky kid. But when it comes to hockey, there's just something that he is not 100% confident with. So he'll go into games and he says, oh, we're gonna lose. He goes in with that vocabulary. And I said, no, you can't. Said, when you win, when this happens, change your vocabulary, because anything can happen if you change your vocabulary and you change your perspective. Then you are giving things a whole different light. And if you heard the episode last week, I chatted with Allie Wills. She is a coach. She supports women with their nutrition, with their weight loss, with their stress management. And she really just spoke about having those good thoughts in your head and putting something out there in the world and having it in the forefront of your mind. And we've talked about this before. The advantage you have when you want to reach a goal, when you want to do something, when you want to accomplish something, is it's telling people, sharing that perspective, using that positive vocabulary. It changes everything. She shared that example of like, you are thinking of buying a car and all of a sudden you notice every Tesla out there because you're thinking of buying a Tesla. Well, now you see them everywhere. Then you're thinking about a white Tesla. Now you see them everywhere. When you put it out there, things are going to happen. Things are going to change. So when we're thinking about perspective, let's think about the vocabulary that's going to support the perspective we want. Let's think of those words, those tiny, even one word change that can help us, that can encourage us, that can inspire us, and say them loud. I feel like I'm getting a little preachy here, but I want the best for you guys. I want you guys to succeed so much. So something to consider when you're thinking of changing your perspective. Think of the words you are using. Think of that vocabulary. Think if there's a way, is that the right word I want to use right now? Maybe there's something else I can use, and that's going to change everything up just that bit. Now, the next thing about perspective, and this is where it gets a little tricky. And I'm not going to fight against what I've said before. I'm not going to take back what I've said before. But one thing you do really need to consider when you're thinking perspectives and you're thinking other people's perspectives is that they are allowed, they are encouraged to have their own perspective. And even if it doesn't line up with the reality that you see or the perception that you see, they have it. And even if you try and share with them that, that's not how what's happening, here's my perspective, here's what's happening, at the end of the day, they may still believe what they believe. I'll give you an example. So my teenage son, I've told you before, I have a teenager. It's crazy. My teenage son is currently in a musical theater show that I'm directing. And I love directing. I've been directing him for years. He's so talented. But he's going through this phase. We've been there. That awkward teenage phase where some of the things you did before, you don't know if they're cool anymore. You're really worried about everybody else's opinion of you. You're really worried about how you're showing up in the world. You're worried about what's happening. So he's in this musical theater show and I'm directing him. So that's hard enough because I'm trying to not play the role of mom, but how do you not? Because I am his mom. That's who I am I can't not be. So I try really hard, but sometimes it doesn't work. And he's in the show, and he was having a really hard time the other night during rehearsal. He was doing his lines, and you could tell he was just kind of embarrassed. He was embarrassed because he's playing this character who's interested in another character, and he doesn't know how to really define the line of like, I'm just playing a character. This is just what I'm doing. So he was getting a little stuck in his head of being embarrassed that he's saying these lines. And then he was getting emotional. And if I thought this kid had big emotions when he was little, these teenage emotions are like 10 times bigger. They are big, big emotions. And he deserves to be able to have them. He deserves to be able to feel them. So I could see him building up, getting embarrassed, getting emotional, and he kind of walked away and just needed a break. And I went over to chat with him. As mom, as a director, I don't know, it was a little bit of both, but I went over to chat with him, and he said, everyone's making fun of me because I'm saying these lines, and he was just telling me his perception of what was happening. He was telling me how he felt, how he perceived what was going on. So I listened. I understood. And then I told him what I thought was happening. I shared my perspective. I said, actually, I think these people are supporting you. I think this is going on. And I was trying to like cheer him up and do all the things. But what I realized at the end of that conversation is that he might still feel his way is how he feels. And he's allowed to. If he still feels that, even though I'm telling him no one was making fun of you, you shouldn't be embarrassed, everyone's here supporting you, you're just playing a character. I'm telling him those things. I'm telling him my perception of what's going on. He's still allowed to feel how he feels. If he still feels embarrassed to say those lines or embarrassed to play that character, I think that's a different conversation. But he is allowed to feel, and he's allowed to say, this is my perception. So we kind of ended it at that. And that happens sometimes in relationships and communication, is like, this is how I feel. This is how I see it. Well, this is how you feel, and this is how you see it. It might never line up completely, but we still have to realize that there's different ways of seeing it. So really remember, when you're having those relationships, you're having communications, you're having issues with people, that although you've shared your perspective, although you wish they sometimes might have listened to your perspective and they agreed with your perspective, they might not. So people are allowed to hear your perspective and keep their own. The last thing I want to talk about when we're talking about perspective is, and this is a tough one, how are you being perceived? I think so many people, myself included, think that we show up in the world a certain way. We think people are like, oh, there's Courtney, she's the Renaissance mama. She's a little bit loud. She does this, she does that. That's what she's all about. But sometimes how we think we're being perceived by people might not actually line up with how people are perceiving us. If you've never done this exercise, I highly suggest it. So you reach out to 5, 10 people. I want a variety of people. I want like friends, family, acquaintances, coworkers, people that you interact with pretty regularly. I want them to know you well enough that they can give you an opinion. And you're just going to ask them and say, listen, what are 3 words that describe me? Or what are 3 things you think about when you think of me? It is such a great exercise. I did this a while ago when I was really working on my next big project. And while I was trying to figure out what was the next big thing I needed to do, I really wanted to kind of figure out my strengths that I thought I had, but I also wanted to see how people were seeing me, what strengths people thought that I had. And what was really interesting is, yes, there was a few things that I was like, yeah, this is what I'm all about. They believed the same. But there was a few traits and a few strengths that I hadn't really ever thought of with myself. but multiple people said it. So it was like this aha moment of, oh, maybe I am known for that. I mean, I do those things. So realizing that people may be perceiving you in a different way than you think you're representing yourself. Once again, I just think this is another huge, powerful, incredible tool. So knowing how people are seeing you, does it line up with how you want to show up? Are you showing up as the person you need to be? If you want to create huge goals and do these big things, are you showing up as that person? Or are you still showing up as the person who kind of wants to do this, maybe wants to do that? You need to think bigger. You need to think, I want to be this super successful person. What do super successful people do? How are super successful people perceived? Figure all of that out, and then you could start acting like that. You could start making choices like those super successful people. You could start thinking of their perspective when you go into a situation, when you go and have an issue, when you have a communication. I don't know. I want you to really think about how people are perceiving you and if it's lining up with how you want them to see you. Are you not showing up as the person you want to be? And if that's the case, then what changes can you make? Are you making maybe those small changes in your vocabulary? Are you thinking of other people's perspectives? Are there ways that you can slightly change things? And like my computer incidents that could have been absolutely horrible, is there a way to rethink about it that now it's something good? And as a parent or a business owner or any person, like, how much do you want to walk away from a situation that maybe wasn't perfect? I don't want to say a failure. You're not. I don't want to say a failure because that's not what it is. But how do we walk away from these situations and think, what could have I done? How can I learn from this? How can I not do this again? Or what can I take from this that's going to make it different next time? That's going to change that perspective a little bit. So before I go, just a few things to think about that really kind of hurt us when we're trying to change our perspective. So number one is emotions. When we think quickly and react and don't give any time to think of other perspectives and we let those emotions take over. Like when I told you that text message, I got really upset right away because I thought they were saying one thing, even though they were saying something completely different. Or my son who got really emotional because he felt embarrassed and he thought people were making fun of him. They weren't, but he didn't want to listen because his emotions had taken over. So emotions sometimes can take the best of us. So try and slow down, try and breathe through the emotions. You're going to feel them, but give them their time and then think, is there a different perspective? Is there a different way I can look at this? Another thing that's really hard and kind of fights against our perspective is time. If we're too busy to even think of somebody's perspective, if I'm that person in the coffee line, super going to be late, want my coffee, like maybe I don't have the time to slow down and think of another perspective. So time is one of those things that, and also I feel like we could even have a full conversation about people's different perspective on time and how much or little they have in their life. And that if they use it differently, how that looks differently. That changes your whole perspective again. And then the last thing that you want to think about when you're thinking perspective is expectations. Are you putting too much expectations on yourself or somebody else? That conversation last week with Allie, she said something that I loved. She said, are you like the list of your things to do and the expectations you have for yourself? Would you give that to a friend? Are the things you expect to do in one day that like you're not going to get any of that done? Would you offer that to somebody and say, here, you need to finish all of this in a day? Probably not, because we're so hard on ourselves. So really think of expectations when you're thinking your perception of things. Is there are you too hard on yourself? Just don't be. I don't want you to be. I want you I want you to succeed so, so much. Okay, friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed chatting about perception and reality and what that means to you. And I would love to hear from you. So hop on the renaissancemama.com, continue our conversation. Tell me, is there a scenario that you feel like maybe a new perspective could have changed everything? I want to hear from you. Check me out on Instagram at Courtney Renaissance Mama and just chat. I want to hear from you, friends. All right. Bye for now, friends.